Parker Schnabel made a decision at the end of a Wednesday shift that left his crew thinking it might cost them their jobs. Not in the usual dramatic sense of being fired, but in the Klondike mining sense, where a crew that has spent weeks doing everything right suddenly watches their operator make a call that seems to go against everything they've ever learned about mining. When something like that happens, the only reasonable reaction is to wonder if you're still working on the right job. The decision was simple, but shocking. Stop. Not stop for the day. Stop the entire excavation program on their main pay zone. This was the ground that had been delivering strong returns all season. It was the ground their entire operational plan was built around. It justified the heavy equipment they were running, the crew they were paying, and the fuel they were burning every single day. Yet Parker stood at the edge of the excavation in the early evening, watching the material coming out of the ground, and told his foreman to shut everything down. "We're going deeper," Parker said. His foreman, a man with 15 years of experience mining in the Klondike, had seen operators make bad decisions before. He knew how those situations usually ended, so he asked Parker to repeat what he had just said. "We're going deeper," Parker repeated. "Not here. We're finished here. The real ground is below where anyone has ever dug on this claim. About 100 feet down, maybe more, and we're going to get there." The foreman looked at the strong cleanup numbers from the week. He looked at the equipment. In his mind, he calculated the cost of the change Parker was proposing, the time it would take, the fuel it would burn, and the disruption it would cause to the operation. Then he looked back at Parker Schnabel. Parker was only in his 20s. Yet he was already the most successful young miner in Klondike history. And he had a reputation for making decisions that looked wrong at first, until the ground proved him right. "How sure are you?" the foreman asked. Parker thought about the drill cores he had been studying for 3 nights in a row. He thought about the geological profile that had slowly started to make sense to him over the past 2 weeks of careful observation. And he thought about the message the ground itself seemed to be giving him. Something the comfortable surface production numbers were hiding. "Sure enough to stop," Parker replied. By the end of that season, Parker Schnabel had recovered $330 million worth of gold from a hidden pay layer nearly 100 feet below the surface. For years, every operator before him had mined the ground above it and left that deeper layer untouched. The upper zone produced reliable returns, and those returns were comfortable enough that nobody had ever felt the need to dig deeper. The story of how Parker found that $330 million started with something many miners never develop: the uneasy feeling that good enough isn't actually good enough. It also started with an inheritance he chose not to fully accept. Parker grew up in mining in a way very few people grow up in anything. He wasn't just around it. He was involved in it from a young age, long before most kids were thinking about careers. His grandfather, John Schnabel, built the family's big nugget mine into a respected institution in the Klondike. The operation, the methods, and the deep understanding of the ground that the Schnabel family had developed over decades were all available to Parker as an inheritance. Most young miners would have accepted that inheritance without question. Parker accepted the foundation, the operational knowledge, the geological instincts, and the understanding of how the Klondike works and what it demands from the people who mine it. But he refused to accept the ceiling. The ceiling is the part of an inheritance most successors take without even realizing it exists. It's the unspoken belief that the achievements of the previous generation represent the limits of what's possible, that the records set by experienced miners define the upper boundary of what the ground can produce. Parker never accepted that idea, not out of defiance, and not as criticism of his grandfather or the miners who came before him. It was simply the way he approached information. When Parker looked at historical production records, he didn't just ask what the ground had produced. He asked what the ground had been asked to produce. Were those results truly the best the ground could offer? Or were they simply the best results possible with the equipment, knowledge, and methods available at that time? Early in his career, Parker came to a clear conclusion. Most of the Klondike's production history represented the best approach available at the time, not the best approach possible for the ground itself. The ground had more to give. What limited production wasn't the gold in the earth. It was the invisible ceiling that each generation of miners inherited from the one before, and rarely questioned. "My grandfather was a great miner," Parker once said. "He mined the Klondike at the level that was possible when he was mining it. I'm mining it at the level that's possible now. Those aren't the same level. And what's possible now isn't the ceiling either. It's just what I know how to do. The people who come after me will go further." This mindset, refusing to accept inherited limits and treating every production record as a starting point rather than a peak, is what pushed Parker to keep drilling core samples long after his crew had finished for the day. It's what made him spend 3 nights studying geological data that he technically had no reason to analyze, given the solid returns they were already getting. And it's what ultimately led him to make that Wednesday evening decision that looked completely wrong, until it produced $330 million. 2 weeks before shutting down the excavation, Parker had quietly started running a parallel investigation alongside the season's regular mining operations. He didn't announce it. He didn't discuss it with the crew. Instead, he worked on it alone during the evenings in the site trailer, studying core samples from a deep drilling program he had ordered at the beginning of the season. To everyone else on the operation, the deep drilling program was simply a routine geological survey, the kind serious mining operations conduct to better understand what lies beneath their claims. And technically, that explanation was true. But Parker's interest in those drill cores wasn't routine. He was searching for something specific. Gold distribution in the Klondike isn't random. It follows patterns shaped by ancient geological events, prehistoric landscapes, long-vanished rivers, and natural processes that concentrated gold millions of years before anyone even imagined looking for it. Parker believed those patterns were pointing to something deeper, and he was determined to find it. For the most part, those geological patterns were understood well enough to help modern mining operations locate productive zones at the usual depths. But there was still an unanswered question, something the geological research recognized as important in theory, but rarely explored in practice. Did those same gold concentration patterns continue deeper than the levels where most Klondike mining usually stopped? In other words, if the ancient geological forces that created productive zones at depths of 30 to 50 feet existed, could those same forces have created even richer deposits farther down? The 100-foot mark in the Klondike wasn't really a geological boundary. It was an operational one. Historically, most mining operations stopped around that depth because the costs of digging deeper often seemed greater than the value of the gold recovered. But what if that limit had been hiding something far more valuable beneath it? Parker had been thinking about that possibility long before the current season began. His curiosity had grown during the previous season's geological work. He discussed ideas with academic geologists who specialized in placer gold deposits. He also spent time studying the geological history of the Klondike in far greater detail than most mining operators focused mainly on production. The deep drilling program he launched this season was meant to answer that question directly. For 2 weeks, Parker studied the drill cores that came from those tests. The answer didn't arrive as a dramatic discovery or a single obvious result. Instead, it appeared gradually, as a growing pattern of evidence across several cores taken from different parts of the claim. Again and again, those samples pointed to the same depth range, between 95 and 110 feet. The material in the cores showed a geological signature Parker had trained himself to recognize. It was something he had spent months learning to identify because he suspected it might exist beneath his ground. It was the signature of a primary gold concentration horizon. In the Klondike, the depth of 100 feet means more than just a number. It represents a threshold, a limit shaped by decades of mining experience. Generations of miners had approached that depth and then turned back. This reputation didn't come from nowhere. Mining at that depth in the Klondike is genuinely difficult. Excavation equipment has to work harder under the pressure of thick layers of overburden. Ground stability becomes more challenging. Groundwater management becomes more complicated, and the amount of waste material that must be removed before reaching productive ground increases dramatically. Because of these challenges, the traditional belief among miners was simple. Digging deeper usually cost more than it returned. But conventional wisdom is always built from the information available at the time it forms. The belief about the 100-foot limit came from miners using the equipment and techniques of earlier generations. They were working ground whose deeper geological structure they didn't fully understand because detailed subsurface data simply didn't exist yet. Parker, however, had started assembling that data. Through the deep drilling program, the geological studies he had been reading, and the core samples he had analyzed over the past 2 weeks, he had gathered enough information to believe something important. The conventional wisdom didn't apply to his claim. The ground beneath the 100-foot level wasn't just a weaker extension of the gold-bearing layer above it. Instead, it appeared to be the result of a completely separate geological event. An older concentration of gold formed under different conditions. For decades, the upper zone had been mined. Different operators had worked the claim over the years, discovering and extracting gold from that upper layer. The production records showed consistent returns from that zone, but those results only represented the gold from the upper layer. The deeper horizon had remained untouched because no one knew it existed. And because the upper zone produced reliable returns, no one had ever felt the need to drill deep enough to discover what lay below. Parker's deep drilling program finally revealed it. The decision he made on that Wednesday evening to stop mining the upper zone and redirect the entire operation toward a deep excavation was not a reckless gamble. It was the logical result of the geological evidence the drilling program had uncovered. Ignoring that information would have been the real gamble. Continuing to mine the comfortable upper zone might have kept the operation profitable in the short term, but it would have meant walking away from the possibility of something far more valuable beneath it. That was a gamble Parker Schnabel refused to take. Transitioning a full-scale Klondike mining operation from standard depth mining to a deep excavation targeting a horizon around 100 feet is not something that happens overnight. Parker understood that clearly before he ever announced the decision. During those 3 nights in the site trailer, he wasn't just studying drill cores. He was also planning the operational steps required for the transition, how the change would unfold, how long each stage would take, and how the crew would stay productive during the weeks when the operation would be spending money without yet producing returns. His plan involved 3 main phases. The first phase was systematic removal of the overburden. The upper productive layer, the ground that had been producing the season's strong cleanup numbers, still had to be cleared from above the deep excavation area. But it wouldn't simply be discarded. Every bit of that material would still be processed through the wash plant. Parker wasn't going to leave recoverable gold in the ground just to move faster. Every cubic yard removed on the way to the deeper layer would still go through the sluice system and produce whatever gold it contained. The second phase involved building the infrastructure required for deep excavation. Reaching 100 feet safely in the Klondike requires more preparation than shallow mining. Equipment must be positioned differently, and additional ground support measures are needed to handle the pressure and stability challenges of deeper digging. Parker had already identified the equipment adjustments and additional preparations the operation would require. They were significant changes, but they were entirely achievable. The equipment already existed. The techniques were well understood. And because Parker had anticipated the possibility of deep mining earlier in the season, much of the preparation work had already been completed. That preparation meant the crew could establish the necessary infrastructure without the long delays that usually happen when operations try to change direction suddenly. The third phase was productive excavation at the primary horizon. This was the stage that would ultimately prove whether Parker's interpretation of the drill cores was correct, or whether his geological analysis had been wrong. The transition took 4 weeks to complete. For 4 weeks, the operation wasn't making money. Instead, it was spending it, using capital, crew hours, and equipment time to pursue a geological theory that only the ground itself could confirm. Throughout that period, the crew followed the plan with a level of professionalism that Parker found quietly impressive. They had been shown the drill core results. Parker had explained the geological reasoning behind his decision. He had also been honest with them about the risks. that it would take 4 weeks before they would know whether the deeper horizon contained what he believed it did. Even with that uncertainty, the crew simply got to work. On the 28th day of the transition, the excavation finally reached the depth range that the drill cores had pointed to. At about 97 feet, the material coming up from the ground began to change. It wasn't an obvious difference to someone without experience, but to seasoned miners, the change was noticeable in subtle ways. The particle sizes were slightly different. The fine material had a different color tone. The density of the material behaved differently in the equipment. These were small details, but miners who have moved enormous amounts of earth learn to read these signals through the way their machines interact with the ground. That day, Parker was running the excavation equipment himself. He had personally operated the machines during much of the deep excavation phase, not because the crew couldn't do it, but because he wanted to be the one holding the controls when the ground finally changed. He wanted to feel the moment the geological prediction became reality, and he felt it at 97 feet. The resistance in the bucket shifted slightly. It was subtle, the kind of change an experienced operator feels in their hands before they consciously realize what's happening. Parker didn't stop immediately. He made 3 more passes to confirm the change wasn't just a small, isolated patch. When the same pattern appeared again across the area, he finally shut down the machine. He climbed out, walked over to the bucket, and took a sample of the material. Standing in the afternoon light, he studied it carefully. This was a moment he had been working toward for months, and he needed to read the signs accurately before reacting. The material looked exactly like the drill cores had suggested it would. The characteristics of gold-bearing gravel were present in the raw sample, the visual indicators experienced placer miners rely on when making quick field judgments before running material through the plant. Parker placed the sample into a container, sealed it, and turned to his foreman. "Set up for cleanup," he said. "We're running what came up today." The first cleanup from the deep horizon was run that evening. Parker didn't watch it with the dramatic excitement that makes good television. Instead, he stood quietly at the edge of the operation, with his arms crossed, focusing on the process. He wasn't waiting for a dramatic moment. He was waiting for accurate information. When the final gold weight was placed on the scale, Parker looked at the number. Then he looked at his foreman. Then he looked back at the number again. "Recalibrate the scale and run it again," he said. The scale was recalibrated. The result came back exactly the same. Parker stood silently for a moment. Then he simply said, in a calm voice that carried almost no emotion, "That's what I thought was there." From that point forward, the season changed completely. What followed that first cleanup from the deep horizon was 51 days of production, unlike anything the modern Klondike mining industry had seen from a single operation. Parker ran the deep mining operation with intense focus and precision. He understood that the season had now become something bigger than just a good run. It wasn't only a successful season or even a personal record. It was becoming a moment that could change how miners in the Klondike thought about deep excavation. Daily cleanup numbers from the deep horizon were multiple times higher than what the upper zone had been producing. Even more important, the concentration factor, the ratio of gold-bearing material to the total volume processed, was significantly higher at 100 feet than it had been anywhere above it. The geological prediction had been correct, not just in general direction, but in scale. The deep horizon was actually richer than Parker's original analysis had predicted. And his original estimate had already been far above what most miners would normally expect. The equipment also held up under the demanding conditions. Parker had designed the deep operation with enough redundancy that when mechanical failures inevitably happened, they didn't shut down production. Instead of causing multi-day delays, most problems were resolved within hours, while the crew handled repairs efficiently. The team operated with a level of focus and discipline Parker later documented in his personal records of the season. Everyone on site understood they were part of something unusual, something that would likely be talked about in the Klondike mining community for years. Rather than creating pressure, that awareness seemed to sharpen everyone's performance. Each person worked at the highest level of their ability because they wanted to contribute to something being done right. At the same time, Parker maintained strict operational discipline. Every day, he monitored the key metrics: gold production per cubic yard, the composition of each cleanup, equipment efficiency, and every other variable that could reveal whether the deep horizon was consistently rich, or whether the early results had simply come from a small, high-grade pocket. 51 days of production data answered that question clearly. The formation extended across the claim. The gold concentration remained consistent throughout the area at the depth of the primary horizon. The geological model that had driven Parker's decision to change the operation had proven accurate at every measurable point. After those 51 days, Parker closed the season. The final numbers were not treated as a celebration. For Parker, they were simply operational data, information that would shape the planning for the next season. Those numbers would feed directly into the geological model he continued to refine, and that model would help answer the remaining questions about the deep horizon, especially the long-term economics of mining it at scale. By the end of the season, the numbers told an incredible story. The total production combined two sources: the gold recovered from the upper zone during the transition period, and the gold produced from the deep primary horizon over the following 51 days. Together, they added up to $338 million in gross production. Then came the costs. Those included the normal operating expenses for the season, the additional costs of transitioning to deep excavation, the investment in extra equipment and infrastructure, and the 4 weeks of preparation when the operation was spending money without producing gold. All of that came to about $8 million. After expenses, the final result was $330 million in net value. When Parker looked at that number, he didn't celebrate it the way many people might expect. Instead, he did what he always did with important figures. He studied it carefully. He wasn't savoring the result. He was analyzing it. He asked himself 3 questions. What did the number confirm? What uncertainties still remained? And what did it suggest about the future? First, what it confirmed. The geological hypothesis about the deep primary horizon had been correct. The drill core signatures had been interpreted accurately, and the bold decision to stop mining the comfortable upper zone and switch to deep excavation had proven to be the right move. Second, what still remained uncertain. The 51 days of production had only worked part of the formation. The full extent of the deep horizon across the entire permitted claim area was still unknown. To understand how far the formation extended and how much gold it might ultimately contain would require more drilling, more production data, and possibly several more seasons of work. Finally, what it implied for the future. With this discovery, Parker Schnabel had become the miner who proved that deep Klondike mining at around 100 feet could not only work, but could be extremely productive when done on the right ground with the right strategy. That proof went beyond Parker's own operation. It had implications for the entire mining community in the region. Other operators would begin to reconsider the deeper geological layers beneath their own claims. Researchers studying the geology of the Klondike would gain new evidence about how deep gold formations might occur. For years, Parker had quietly contributed to academic geological research on deep placer formations in the Klondike. Now his real-world results added powerful confirmation to that work. When people later asked him about the significance of the season, Parker kept his answer simple. "The $330 million is mine," he said, "but the geological proof that deep Klondike mining works, that belongs to everyone. That part I'm happy to share." And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the Timefold channel for more stories about discoveries, strategy, and the people who change entire industries with a single decision.